We're going to do Bust City here, folks, and we're going to start with the running backs. And Jamie, I'll start with you, a very popular one who's been in the headlines lately.
Derrick Henry, yeah, you know, it's one of those situations where I know we're going to get some, probably our guy Zach Brooks going to clip these off, so I'm going to say at cost, because obviously I would love to have Derrick Henry on my fantasy team. But when you look at the situation here for, oh no, I'm sorry.
JT,
Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
What am I thinking? Jonathan Taylor. Let's reset. So I'll start again. Jonathan Taylor is a bust. When you look at the situation for him, just nervous about how this is all unfolding. You know, so when you talk about the missed time, and you talk about the ankle injury, and you talk about not knowing when he's going to show up, he definitely is not worth drafting in the first round. It's hard to justify drafting him in the second round. And then you look at the third round and what the situation is right now, and he starts to get into that receiver pool and the quarterback pool and Mark Andrews. And it's like, okay, who am I going to take? And so right now he's still in the early part of the third round for me, but I'm very, very concerned just about the situation. So while I'm concerned about Derrick Henry as well, I'm also worried about Jonathan Taylor. I would try to avoid him if you can.
Yeah, and I've got a guy who's going in the third round who had an ankle injury last year. It's Najee Harris. And I know people look at Najee Harris and say, look at all those touches that he gets. Mike Tomlin's always had a feature running back. He's going to have 300 touches. He can't be a bust in round 3 with 300 touches. Well, there's a history for this. It doesn't have anything to do with Mike Tomlin. You look at running backs with more than 500 touches, their first 2 seasons in the league, who were below both 4 yards per carry and 5 yards per target. I'm going to read these names off real fast. Cadillac Williams, Willis McGahee, Julius Jones, Anthony Thomas, Antoine Smith, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Eric Rett, Natron Means, Ronald Moore. Those guys combined for 3 top 20 seasons the rest of their career after their first 2 seasons. If you are as inefficient as Najee Harris has been the first 2 years in the league, you generally don't keep getting those touches. And we saw it at the second half of last year that Jaylen Warren took over the passing downs. I wouldn't be surprised if he takes over more of the rushing downs this season.
That was quite a list. And by the way, with Jonathan Taylor, top overall pick last year in a lot of drafts, and obviously didn't produce there. And then, Jamie, you're saying he's going to continue to fall possibly.
I do hope that everything gets settled, and I'm wrong, but it's just hard to trust at this point.
No doubt. All right, let's get to the wide receivers here. And Jamie, you're going to go with Davante Adams.
This guy, I'm just concerned about, period. You know, so he's now age 30, and what we've seen from receivers at this age is where they start to tail off. So over the last 10 years, there's been 17 guys that have been 15 PPR points or more per game on average, and only 3 of them have been in the range that Davante Adams was last year when he was at 19 points per game. So we got 180 targets last year from from Derek Carr. Now you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. The foot could still be a problem for him. We've heard some different reports just on how healthy he looks. And so the problem for me when we get to the second round with Davante Adams, which I'm glad that that's where his ADP is right now, is he's in that group of receivers with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Jaylen Warren. You could even say maybe A.J. Brown slips to that spot as well. I would take all those guys over him. I think their quarterback situations are better. I think their scenarios are better for what they're looking at. He's already been banged up a little bit in camp. And if things start to go south for the Raiders, he already expressed he was a little frustrated with how the things unfolded this offseason. Is he going to be a happy camper? So he's somebody that I tend to avoid in round 2.
So I'm going to say the same thing with quarterback, but when you look at it in a different way. But when you look at the wide receiver ADP on CBS, there's not really very many wide receivers that are going too early. But if you look at where they're going amongst wide receivers, A.J. Brown now the wide receiver 5, ahead of Stephon Diggs, ahead of CeeDee Lamb, ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I'm a little bit concerned. He's 2.5 rounds ahead of his teammate Devontae Smith, who actually had more catches than A.J. Brown did last year. I think both these guys emerging, obviously, it's going to be a great offense, but I don't want to take A.J. Brown ahead of those guys as a number 5 wide receiver, and I much prefer Devontae Smith 2.5 rounds later.
It's interesting you talk about the market, so to speak, with ADP and conversely with A.J. Brown. If we go to tight ends, we had this conversation last week about George Kittle, Jamie, that people still have a name recognition for George Kittle being a top 3 tight end, and and they're drafting in mocks that way, but probably not the case in reality here, right?
Well, we saw the initial ADP on CBS Sports. He was the number 2 tight end, and he was going in round 4, and that's just a huge mistake. I mean, don't take him ahead of Mark Andrews, first off. And then you get to that next group of guys, which he's in that mix. He deserves to be in the mix with Darren Waller and TJ Hawkinson and Kyle Pitts and Dallas Goedert. For me, he's at the back end of that because the 49ers are a victim of their own success. They have so many great players, and they're all going to command the ball. There's going to be weeks where George Kittle's probably the number 1 tight end, but there's going to be a lot of weeks like we saw last year where he's probably closer to 10, if not 12. And that's because he's not scoring touchdowns or not getting those opportunities. And what we saw last year, when Brock Purdy took over, Deebo Samuel missed 3 games. In the 3 games that he was out, he scored 5 touchdowns, George Kittle. He basically averaged 5 touchdowns a season for the beginning of his career. He finished with a career high 7 touchdowns last year. I think the problem is that when Deebo's healthy, Ayuk's healthy, McCaffrey's healthy, he's the 4th option. And that's hard to say knowing that he's so talented. So I still love drafting him. If I get him in round 7, round 8, I'm thrilled. But in the first 5 rounds, I'm out on George Kittle.
Yeah, I agree with everything he said about Kittle. One guy I have right behind him who he doesn't agree with is Darren Waller. And there are similar concerns. It's not a concern about too many weapons in New York. I mean, they've got 17 slot wide receivers, but they shouldn't stand in Darren Waller's way. It's a problem about what the volume is overall in the pass offense. People talk about the step forward that Daniel Jones took last year. Well, the step forward was the fact they had him throw less than he ever had in his career. He ran more than he ever had, and he's better as a rusher than he is as a passer. Waller has missed 14 games over the last 2 seasons. He's 31 years old, a year older than Kittle. I am just concerned about a variety of different things that could go wrong, and so he is at the back of that tight end list for me.
But let me ask you a question, though, because we do this every offseason when now these quarterbacks get new weapons. Why is Daniel Jones not getting the benefit of the doubt for getting a new weapon?
Generally, those quarterbacks have been in the league for 1 year, maybe 2 years. Daniel Jones has given us 4 or 5 years of showing us what he is as a passer.
So
I would judge him based on the Daboll years, though.
yeah, it's nice.
He wasn't better as a
conversation
passer
now.
last year. He's the same efficiency. He just ran
now,
really well.
But now it's getting a better weapon to hopefully improve the passing.
It's clear he got paid like he's a better passer,
Yeah.
but that's another debate to have. So before the tease, I had mentioned that one of you guys had selected Patrick Mahomes as a bust candidate. Heath, I'll have you go this time. Is it Patrick Mahomes for you?
It's not Patrick Mahomes
Okay,
for me.
you didn't choose him then,
But,
then who is
but
it then for you?
It's the opposite thing at quarterback than it is at wide receiver when you talk about ADP. Like, there's not very many wide receivers going earlier than I think they should. All the quarterbacks, except for 2 or 3, are going earlier than I think they should. And Joe Burrow in round 2, 2 full rounds ahead of Justin Fields, who we've talked about as a breakout, is that bust for me. I do like Burrow. I think he's safer than Fields or Lamar Jackson, but Jamie talked about it. Like, what we're interested in a quarterback is that upside. He doesn't have the same upside of those guys, and he's currently hurt. So I would not draft Burrow in round 2.
It's Patrick Mahomes for me, and it's nothing about him as a player. It's just about where fantasy managers are valuing him. Now, I'm going to sort of hedge a little bit here because our ADP combines every format. So that includes Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. So that could be why we're seeing Patrick Mahomes as a round 1 pick. But in a 1 quarterback league, I think that's how you lose your fantasy league, by drafting him in round 1. It's not just him. Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, the last ADP update I did Monday on CBSSports.com, all 3 of those guys are going in round 1. That's a huge mistake. Again, in a 1 quarterback league. Obviously, you're getting the back end of round 1 and 2 quarterback Superflex league. You love it. But we've seen this time and time again. The best way to win your fantasy league is to take one of those mid-round or late-round quarterbacks and hope that they become what Patrick Mahomes was once upon a time. The Justin Fields of the world, maybe the Anthony Richardsons of the world, Tua Tagovailoa, some of those guys. Now you're going to get great production from Patrick Mahomes. It's, again, nothing about him falling off, Super Bowl hangover, losing wide receivers, forget about that. But if you take him in round 1, you're passing up some great running back and wide receiver value. And then you got to start to look at the pairing. Okay, who am I taking later? Am I getting Lamar Jackson in, let's say, round 4? Am I getting Joe Burrow? I think round 2 is probably going to be, again, similar situation, not where he's going. But those type of guys with whom I'm getting at those other spots if I'm going Mahomes and somebody else a little bit later. So I would take running back, wide receiver over Mahomes. You're not going to get Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen in those same ranges either. But just wait if that's the case. If somebody else in your league is really that gung-ho about taking Mahomes, let them have them. You will win your fantasy league. They will probably struggle.
All right, great advice from Jamie and Heath. Guys, certainly appreciate it. Fantasy Football Today recently launched a new podcast, a Dynasty version. And Heath, since I have you here, give us a little 15-second tease about what the pod's about.
Yeah, we were talking about Dynasty Fantasy Football. We had Dynasty Deep Sleepers with Sigmund Bloom. We have guests from around the industry. We have your favorite FFT voices.
Love it. Scan that QR code.